When buying something new, it can be tempting to choose the cheapest option. But as we all know, a low price often means poor quality. When you consider the whole life cycle cost of a product, buying things that simply don't break will be the best option, both financially and environmentally. That's why Vestre's goal is to produce furniture that lasts forever. When our designers approach a new design, sustainability is a key factor. Therefore, we use short-haul materials of the best quality. Slow growing in its cold Nordic environment, Scandinavian pine gets extra hard. This makes it exceptionally durable and well-suited for outdoor use. Nordic steel is hot-dip galvanized and powder-coated to meet Norwegian offshore standards. The steel production generates 30% lower greenhouse gas emissions than the world average. Having taken such measures to select the best materials, we do not hesitate to offer a lifetime guarantee against rust and a 15-year guarantee on wood and paint. Vestre offers spare parts for all the furniture we've ever made. After many years of use, worn-out furniture can be returned to our factory for restoration and reuse. So that's how our products last forever and ever and ever. This aids Vestre on our way to becoming the most sustainable furniture company in the world. Our products may cost a little bit more, but in the end, if you consider the whole life cycle cost, we believe no one can beat us.
Hello everybody, sorry I'm having a few issues with moving my PowerPoint on, so if you can just bear with me, I'll be with you in a second and we'll get chatting to everybody. It won't be long now, hopefully. Right, we're here. So welcome this morning to this month's Fika. We are with a few people who would like to introduce to you, and they'll be speaking later on SDG 10, Reduced Inequalities. We have Simon Hall and Beatrice Freeman from PWP Design and Rob Vint of Vint Engineering. Their entry into the Landscape Institute's Transforming the Urban Landscape competition at the end of last year was one of the runners-up, and we also awarded the entry our Vestre accolade because it was so in line with all of our values and ethos in terms of sustainability and in terms of creating caring meeting places. And we're going to talk about My Third Place today. They will introduce the project and the video that shows extremely well the principles behind their proposals. And then we'll have a discussion about what My Third Place might mean to you. So welcome to all of you. It's great to see you here this morning and thank you for joining us as usual. If I can bring everybody else in, it might be a good time to introduce people and get everybody to turn mics and videos back on. Just a little bit of background. I know we talk about the SDGs every month in Fika and hopefully help to bring them to life for you. SDG 10 we felt was really in line with this month's conversation, reduced inequalities, because I think you'll see that the kind of proposals that Simon, Beatrice and Rob put forward along with their colleagues bring together potentially some of the most vulnerable members of society, and I think can address some of the inequalities that we're seeing in our towns and cities at the moment and that have been particularly brought about over the last year by COVID. It's really about reintroducing life into forgotten areas, and I think some of these are absolutely the kind of places that communities could gain a massive amount from if we're able to share these sorts of facilities. So Beatrice, are you happy to run your first video if I stop sharing now and we can take it from there?
Absolutely, thank you.
Okay.
My first place is home, my second place is work, and my third place is somewhere outside of these to connect with the local community, engage in cultural events, and socialise with people. The COVID-19 pandemic has transformed our relationship with our home and work and increased our reliance on the local area. PWP Design and Vint Engineering were runners-up in the recent Landscape Institute International Ideas competition that aimed to address the demands that COVID-19 is making on the landscapes of our cities and towns. Our submission explored the concept of creating a network of My Third Places that bring life to underused outdoor spaces of every scale. We believe that everyone in the country deserves to be within walking distance of a My Third Place. The opportunity to roll this out on a national scale in response to a public health emergency is inspired by the Victorian revolution of urban parks.
Hello, my name's Rob Vint, owning director of Vint Engineering, and my third place over the last 12 months or so has to be the local park in Haxby where we live. I've had many occasions where I've taken my two boys who are 5 and 6 to the park, and been able to have the luxury of sitting at one of the benches with my laptop doing a little bit of work in the knowledge that the boys are playing safely in the park there.
Hi, I'm Bea, and my third place is Woodhouse Moor. Going for walks in the park and seeing other people have fun gave me comfort during the lockdown that everybody was going to pull through this difficult time.
My third place during lockdown were occasional visits to Shambles Market in York. We'd go for some lunch or to grab a coffee, and sometimes we'd bump into a friend. It was nice having a place to go that was sort of a glimpse of normality and with people coming together in a safe way.
My third space over the last year was the grounds of Leeds Beckett University near our home. Here, my family and myself were able to spend time exploring the woods, enjoy the open green space, and also take a breather in a place where we had some kind of social interaction on a daily basis.
Hi, my name is Cara, and my third place this last year has been my daily lunchtime walks around the streets and countryside from my house. What's your third place been this last year?
And our team are delighted to be invited to debate this further at Fika with friends.
Okay, great. Well, I've just realised I'm sat in front of the same wallpaper as I was in our video. Morning, everyone. I'm Simon Hall from PWP Design. I'll let the team introduce themselves.
I'm
I'm
Rob Vint
Beatrice.
from. Sorry, Beatrice, go on, you go on. I'll go
Sorry,
last.
I'm Beatrice. I'm an assistant landscape architect at PWP Design. To you, Rob.
Rob Vint, Vint Engineering, owning director of Vint Engineering. We're civil and structural engineers and have passion about creating spaces where people can enjoy and use the space between buildings.
So, thanks for joining us today, and thanks to Vestre for hosting this event. I think landscape architects have a huge role to play in the post-COVID recovery that we're all sort of underway with. And it's great to be part of that discussion today. I think focusing on the idea of reducing inequality, and I think COVID has laid bare many issues in society in terms of inequality and inclusive space. And that was really sort of the beginnings of our idea for My Third Place. So the Landscape Institute, we're clearly thinking about this and wanting to draw on the massive resource of all the landscape architects out there, looking at these kind of issues on day-to-day projects. And they launched a project or a design competition end of last year to explore those ideas and to think about how the landscapes of our towns and cities can change or should change and evolve, as we begin to come out of lockdown. It gained an amazing response from students and professionals across the world, and obviously, as Romy said, it was fantastic to be made runners up on that. I think looking at the entries, there was a massively diverse range of ideas that came through, and here's a couple of snippets from some of the other entries, and a wide range of themes. And I suppose when you start looking at urban spaces and residential spaces. There's big issues that we need to tackle, and actually a lot of space doesn't work for people and doesn't really work for communities. So looking at how the public health emergency has changed the public realm, I think there's actually been a positive change in some ways, that some of the things that we've been talking about changing for years, such as creating foot streets and widening pavements and making better seating, can suddenly appear overnight, because on the back of this being a public health emergency. So we're finding in projects that actually there is opportunity, but we think that it's important that good design sort of backs that up. So hopefully gone are the days of bollards creating these outdoor spaces and spill out spaces. And actually what we're seeing in the last few weeks as businesses are beginning to reopen is some fantastic creativity and brilliant kind of takeovers of space. I think it's fair to say, though, that that's happened a lot in town centres, and perhaps not out in communities, and that's where my third place perhaps comes in. So when we started approaching as a team the my third place, or sorry, the Landscape Institute's design competition, we ran it as a Zoom workshop as a team. The whole of our practice got involved, and we invited Rob Vint from our Vint Engineering to join the team, who collaborates with us on lots of fantastic projects. I think it's really important to have engineering and architecture and landscape architecture all sort of working together on these ideas, as opposed to each sort of profession working individually. So today what we want to do is really talk through some of the ideas, how the ideas came to be, and then we're going to move on to 3 discussion points and open it up for questions within those discussion points, and really sort of give you a little bit of a glimpse into how our team came up with the ideas and some of the thoughts we have moving forwards. So here's some of the initial thoughts we had in our first workshop, and we were trying to sort of think about what this submission should be, and how do we create a concept for that. It's important to say that the design competition, you were able to pick any site in the world, however big or small. So moving on to the next slide. So here's some of our initial sketches. I don't know if anyone has any thoughts on that they wanted to add from the team. But I think
just to say that the principles that we were considering could be applied to the majority of spaces, be it a town centre, be it a high street, be it a park, or an unused garage compound, which is the site that we identified. When we were looking at it, we were thinking actually which members of the community need to be supported more. Not everyone has a garden, and not everyone has a space that they can actually go and use and appreciate as their third space. So we were considering how we can actually identify infrastructure that's already in place but just sitting and underused, and we have found when we've been looking that throughout a lot of neighbourhoods there's these garage blocks that are just sitting empty. No one really uses them for cars anymore, and it seemed an ideal opportunity to focus on this particular one in Leeds, which, as I say, the principles that we've applied here could as easily be applied to the high street or different parts of our public realm. But we'll show here how there are numerous examples of similar sorts of sites up and down the UK, which we thought this could be a great way of trying to create space for communities where the residents that live closest to them don't really have outdoor space to enjoy.
No, I think it's an important point. And what's interesting is, I suppose, everyone sort of listening today, be thinking about where you're my third place, and do you actually have one? Does everyone listening have within a 5-10 minute walk somewhere where they feel, is welcoming and inclusive, and actually a brilliant place to go meet friends and do various different things? And I think probably the answer is there's lots of people in the country that don't have that. So moving on to the next slide, we just sort of flick through because a lot of this was covered in the video. But yeah, the big idea is, your first place being home, your second place being work. What happens, I suppose, when you stop going to work and start working from home? Do you have a garden yourself? Do you have a park around the corner? And therefore, where do you go in a safe manner to go meet friends? So we started looking as a group at different ideas and different places for the My Third Place case study, because we needed to pick one site and do a scheme for the design competition. So we were looking at anything from high streets. Coney Street in York is an interesting one. For those familiar with York, it's one of the sort of main high streets with lots of big name retailers, and actually it's been one of the ones, you know, York has fared pretty well in recent years, you know, given the decline of high streets nationally, but the scars are showing along Coney Street, and you know, how can these principles of creating more inclusive spaces for the community on high streets sort of roll out. The site we actually picked was in Hyde Park, so I don't know, Beatrice, you've obviously, it's closer to you. So what were your thoughts on the space, and what does it look like today?
Well, it's a site that I've always walked past, and anyone who lives as a student in Hyde Park will know. It was just a massively big site compared to a lot of the streets, because Hyde Park is very tight and back-to-back housing, and this bit is like a kind of big open space. But obviously, it's used mostly for parking for a couple of building contractors, and then I don't think many of the even garages are used anymore. They all looked run down, but you can see there's a bit of grass and shrubs kind of start to emerge there. It's kind of your typical brownfield site, but it's obviously right next to the Hyde Park Picture House and all the local shops where everybody goes twice a day. Sometimes as a student, you're always just picking up bits and bobs like your milk. It was kind of the ideal spot where my third place would be in Leeds, especially families and students living in this area. So this is one of the reasons I put it forward. And obviously as well, we knew that my third place could be the kind of design that doesn't have to be a starting from scratch site. It's got infrastructure there that we could use, and actually the garages were placed round in a U shape on the site, creating a lovely kind of central hub, which when we were designing, we all had similar ideas that everything's built out towards the centre into this hive of activity. So it lent it to that kind of third place idea.
It's
So
how you would
easily.
design it, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
If you were starting from scratch, you would want to create that enclosure. So moving on to the next slide, I think we had a couple more options that we were looking at. We'll touch on these later, but on the left-hand side, we've got your classic leftover green space in a housing estate. You know, we see these every day of the week, and they're just not used, and actually they tend to be fenced off. They're a massive asset, and actually, you know, when you think about people living in flats that don't have gardens, as this is the case, you know, getting people or giving people the ownership or the ability to start using and capturing these spaces is really important.
Yeah.
And then we're also considering Sleaford Marketplace, which is one of our projects that we'll come on to later, as an option. You know, how do you bring the community into the heart of towns? Okay.
And just to add as well, Simon, on the housing development side, you often find that the landscape is the last piece of work that's delivered, and where financial pressure is generated for the developer, it tends to be the area that suffers greatest from value engineering and reductions. Hopefully, as we move into more off-site manufactured housing, it'll give an opportunity for the public realm to be in the landscaping to actually be established before the houses are delivered. And the pandemic has shown how important the outdoor space is. It shouldn't just be a gap between buildings, but it's shown how vital it is that people have good high quality space in between their homes and houses and schools and the likes.
Absolutely.
Definitely.
So it's another image of the site.
Yeah, as you can see as well, it's on one of the main roads into Hyde Park, and recently Leeds City Council have been testing roadblocks with big planters throughout Hyde Park, and this was one of the roads in the areas that they'd blocked off at one of the ends to try and stop the rat routes going through, to reduce the kind of car activity and just encourage more pedestrian activity, which was really appropriate during lockdown as well, because everybody in this area was walking around to get around to see like Woodhouse Ridge and Woodhouse Moor for walks and use the green spaces. So that really lent into our idea as well, that the space could spill out and create that kind of hive of pedestrian and cycle activity as well within that 20-minute neighbourhood. It's another site photo. You can see it is very forgotten, but it's got a lot of potential.
So we've got now a few images of the submission. I think what was good about the design competition actually was they only looked for 2 A3 pages, so you really had to sort of distill down what it was and get that message across. And what we wanted to show in this really was that there's a massive diverse range of activities and uses that can happen in a small space, from coffee mornings to yoga classes, to toddler groups, to the sad fact that we have food banks in this country, bringing all these different uses together into one place. And I think that touches on that theme of inequality. When you do try and create a space that works for everyone, you need to consider this range of uses and flexibility as well.
I think it also helps to make our infrastructure more sustainable, rather than a facility being open for a few hours a day and then closing as one activity finishes. It means that actually there's potential for one space to be used for a number of different activities, which means we're not having to build new buildings to house something that could potentially be facilitated in an existing building.
One of the other key ideas about this was actually that it becomes this network nationally. Now, I know it's only a design competition and an idea, but it'd be a fantastic thing to achieve this kind of network and actually learning from each other, as these sites start potentially coming forwards. We had the idea of an app, didn't we, that you could find where your local My Third Place was and find out what activities were happening there during the day.
Yeah, you could access it if you were visiting someone for a weekend. If you wanted to go for a coffee or join an arts workshop, it'd be easy to jump on there and see what's on with all the events.
So I don't think we're sort of reinventing the wheel here. There are lots of amazing projects happening nationally, but I think our big idea was really about that idea that of equality, and making sure that post-COVID there is that legacy of spaces that's accessible across the country. So we'll flick through these because we're going to come on to this a bit later with some of the design principles. And here's our final scheme. So it tries to put into place all of those different kind of principles, and as Rob and Beatrice said, looking at using the garage blocks and that infrastructure that's already there, but also that creative, flexible space that can be adapted and evolve, and I think become owned by the groups that use it, and curated by them.
We liked the idea that some of these units could kind of grow or shrink how you need them. So you could have a larger unit for like study spaces, or you could divide it up into smaller pods that would be kind of social distance safe and could be individually rented. And then you can change that up again if you want to open them up depending on kind of the time of year or how many people want to use it for events.
We've also found as well during the pandemic that not everyone has the luxury of having a spare room to use as their home office. But also after the pandemic, there's a potential and likelihood that a lot of people will actually continue to work from home in some sort of capacity. So having a space that could be utilised for work in a flexible arrangement means that people who are working from home can either sit in one of these spaces, or they can arrange to meet some of their neighbours there, so it breaks up the day for them. They're not just sitting in isolation, but they do have an opportunity to create a social group there, as well as being able to work near to their doorstep and not having to commute into a central office.
So the sort of the second part of our discussion today is a bit more of, we've got three kind of key talking points, and we were going to debate that as a team, and we'd really sort of welcome questions and chat in the chat box, and we were going to sort of talk through these and see where we go, really.
Sure. Right, I'll just share our final slide.
Video before we do that. I'm jumping the gun.
Just to see the detail of the design a bit further and how the kind of space works in 3D.
My first place is home, my second place is work, and my third place is somewhere outside of these to connect with the local community.
My third place.
My third place.
My third place.
Thanks, everyone. That was brilliant.
Sorry.
That's all right. Thanks, Beatrice. Shall I dive in? We've got one question before we start, maybe. Shall I ask that? Set things in motion? Yeah. Stephen Boxall. Hello, Stephen. He's asked, and I think it's a question that actually probably quite a few people are thinking. He says, local authorities are strapped for cash. About 50% of them are close to bankruptcy. So they tend to see any asset in terms of how they can get money from it via rents or selling off, or he also says maximising the value by selling that space for housing development, rather than an asset which benefits the community in an unmonetised way. How do we get around this barrier? I think given that somewhere like you've just shown in Leeds is clearly in an area potentially of deprivation, that's probably a really pertinent question for these kinds of facilities.
It is. I think it's a really important point, and I think one of the ways to look at it is, yes, I mean, a lot of these sites may have a longer term regeneration use or for housing, that kind of thing. But actually the beauty of them is they're temporary and pop up. And one of the projects that we worked on recently, which is Spark York, was a temporary sort of box park in the centre of York, and it used a council-owned disused car park. Future plans for regeneration, but it gained a temporary meanwhile planning permission for 3 years. And it brought that space that was dead and unused into brilliant use for years. And then, you know, in the future that becomes apartments or whatever it does, and the idea moves on. So that there is that challenge, and you know, revenue is everything. And if there is some means of making revenue through these projects, all the better. You know, there is the opportunity for renting out of space and supporting small startup businesses. So there is that opportunity to make this into something that, you know, does begin to tick those boxes. Is there anything else to add from anyone else?
Yeah, I think it's a good example that you've identified there, Simon, because Spark York was quite a challenging site for the council to deal with. They weren't getting any offers in for the site, and it was a central site, but it was a strange shape, and through using it as a meanwhile use facility that is supportive of pretty much everyone within the community, it's actually lifted the profile of that space. So for the council, they're actually sitting now on a piece of land that is of greater value, but also with the concept that they can actually move to other parts of the city where there isn't as much valuable space for the residents in that area. They also the funding for that project was a part funded by the council, but also through crowdfunding. So there is means of mechanisms to allow funding to be generated. But ideally, it's generated small units that are perfect for startup practices to actually move into. And there's been a large proportion of those that have been successful and been able to then take on vacant buildings within the city centre, which were even more of a problem for the council. So the high street's very challenging.
Sorry, Rob. One other point to add on that is, yeah, I mean, brilliant. If disused sites then do come into use for housing, all the better. But I suppose what we're getting at here is that those schemes don't often bring forward projects like this within them, and that there's sort of a bigger issue, isn't there, on planning policy to make sure that quality community spaces are embedded into housing schemes. And you know, we know that's challenging, and there's issues around that. But I suppose that's why we flagged this up in the design competition.
I think it's worthwhile saying as well, saying for other councils, they've identified that certain sites have potential to add or to create enhanced public spaces, and they've not had the planning policies in place to be able to protect those places. So we've assisted them to introduce meanwhile facilities and a strategy that then means that they are able to refuse or challenge planning applications that are submitted that don't actually feed into generating an improved public realm. So it helps in that sense as well.
That can be sort of proof of concept in a meanwhile sense that there is a demand for these sort of facilities, and that they will be used if they're provided into the future, I guess. Yeah, no, thank you. That's answered that one really well, I think. Do you want to dive into some of your next planned questions?
Yeah, so the first topic we wanted to talk about was the big theme of the day, really, the reduce inequalities idea. Again, if there's any questions, Romeo, that pop up,
Yeah, I'll
feel
keep
free
an eye
to
out.
chip in with them. But really a bit of a debate amongst the team. You know, we've been talking about this over the last few months, and I think that the starting place for us is that there is inequality in public space, and it is, you know, how do you truly design for all?
Definitely. I think it's about making everyone feel welcome. So it's not just a space that's trendy that young people want to go to, but also older people can go to, or families will feel appropriate. There's space for them. It's kind of, how do we tick all those boxes? And we were saying that, yeah, people could go and buy a coffee, but people could also go and take their own coffee in a flask and go for free to meet people. You don't have to spend any money. It's kind of accessible for everyone in that way. Or yeah, if you can pay to rent a space out if you want to for a certain group or activity, but also are the ones that are on a rota that anyone can use for free on certain days.
Just remind me of a project, we weren't involved in this, but a brilliant idea from the Business Improvement District in Newcastle, where they were looking at ways to get extra seating into the public realm, and there was challenges over, you know, the point you were just making about people having to buy a coffee to be able to sit down. And what they did was they used their street wardens to just take out on a daily basis some cafe tables and chairs and put them in the streets, you know, in pedestrian areas, and they were called relaxation stations, I seem to remember. And it was a brilliant idea, because basically it was saying, come and sit down here, you don't need to buy a coffee, here's some great seats with the best view in the city, you know, looking over the waterfront. And it's a really clever, simple idea with not very much kit or, you know, permission required, I guess, to go take over a bit more space.
We had a very similar scenario actually in Times Square in New York, of all places. Prior to the pedestrianisation, there wasn't very much seating available, and everywhere that there was assigned to a shop or a restaurant. And after it was 80% pedestrianised, we provided through the local bid again a lot of sort of cafe chairs and tables. And I understand that the marshals or the sort of street wardens there had to actually tell people that they could sit down and use them, because they were so nervous about having to buy something. It was a completely strange concept. So I think it's the same the world over, weirdly. You know, they had to be given permission to just sit and use them and do whatever they liked. So it's everywhere, that concept of it not being for everyone.
Yeah, that kind of getting places to feel welcoming and for you. And I mean, another challenge as designers we find is that actually, whilst I don't think there's any sort of any undercurrent to this, but sometimes design briefs focus spaces on you know, certain parts of the community. You know, and that sort of brings me on to thoughts about actually excluding teenagers from spaces and skateboarders and those kind of things. And actually, as designers, we've got a bit of a duty to fight the corner, really, on those kind of projects.
I think as well, Sam, we've discussed a number of times on how a lot of our town centres and in high streets, there's nothing for families, there's nothing for kids. Why would you go there other than to buy something? And there's one or two developers are actually realising that introducing some play space for a small family can actually create that can be the sole purpose for the family going there. And once they're there, the businesses around then actually benefit from that. But creating facilities within towns that support the whole family is vital. We live on the edge of York, and we very rarely go into York now, because through the pandemic we've realised that actually everything we need is on the doorstep here. But with a little bit of tweaks and some work, it could be even better again. And I think touching on the seating, there's very little seating in our public realm, and it is a very important point. But seating that's potentially robust enough to allow other activities to take place on it, like so the play for older children, skateboarders and the likes as well, at times of the day when the more vulnerable don't actually want to be using the space.
We've got a vote for skate to be integrated in a subtle and well thought out way from Richard. So there's one there. I'm actually putting together a CPD for June for the Landscape Institute. They've got a CPD run of 3 days on inclusive environments. So I think there's going to be a lot of discussion around all of this coming sort of mid-June, and the conversations around what the content should be about antisocial behaviour and intermediate armrests, and all those kinds of things. It's gaining traction because it's such an issue, really. It's about who you're inviting and who you're allowing to use that space. And one example, the guy I'm going to co-present it with, Will Sandy, he's made the point that there is only one public bench in the whole of Lambeth, because they don't want to maintain, they don't want to encourage antisocial behaviour. They're going with quite a lot of individual chairs now. That's an incredible statistic for people with mobility issues, or older people, or people with children. Where do you actually just plonk yourself for a while? It's a shame.
It almost perpetuates that if people feel like they can't go and sit down, then in my head that there'd be more antisocial behaviour because there's less footfall, because people aren't going for a wander just round the block for 5 minutes.
Exactly.
Whereas you get a lot of activity, there tend to be more social, safer spaces because of natural surveillance.
Exactly, and that's proven over and over again, isn't it? We just have to keep pushing it and saying so.
Yeah, certainly. We delivered a project down in New Addington on the edge of Croydon a few years back, probably about 10 years ago now, and it was quite a different approach there, in that the seating was made similar to what your introduction, Romy, where it's sustainable. The seating there was reinforced concrete, but with edges that could be utilised by skateboarders and stuff on an evening. So it may well cost a little more at the start, but actually it's more sustainable because it's robust and can be used by everyone within the community.
Exactly. Yeah, multi-use, multifunction. I think that's the other point about what you've shown and talked about today. It has to embrace everybody at every point, really, doesn't it?
Yeah, definitely. And what we don't have to do as well is just jump into that final solution. A lot of what we do in towns and cities is, with Simon and ourselves, is to actually look at pop-up interventions. So you're testing what could potentially work in spaces without having to commit a considerable amount of money. And by doing it with a pop-up feature, you can then move it around and work out what works best in which locations. And we found ourselves that the clients can often spend £20,000–30,000 on a design for a permanent solution, where actually that £20,000–30,000 can be spent to actually make a difference to cover the cost of pop-up features, which can actually be enjoyed by everyone.
That kind of project to transform an entire town centre, haven't we, Rob?
Yes.
And it's delivered within 3 months.
Yeah.
I mean, that. Sorry, Simon, go on. You continue.
Often places are sort of planning for this, final regeneration, and these schemes that take years. And actually, if you can get in there early with actually showing that something can happen, it brings people on board, so you can be more playful and fun with it as well. And I think that kind of ownership and having a life of its own is really important to the My Third Place concept, really.
Yes, yeah, Matt, sorry, I was just going to say, Matt makes the point. It's about having a wider demographic on anybody you're consulting with, to champion a sort of shadow board of all ages. And I think that's very true. You do need small children, young people, young adults, older people. Stephen makes the point that you need seats everywhere. His mother-in-law planned her walk into town by the seats she could use and rest on to get her strength back. And I think there's evidence that you need them every sort of 50 to 100 metres. There are many people who can't walk further than that without a break. So, yeah.
I think it's really important. Actually exciting and fun as well. I mean, we walk around a lot of our towns, and actually there's not a great deal of liveliness there. They can be quite dull places. And we found it at Selby, where we introduced some pop-up features there that actually they were so bold and bright and colourful and exciting. They weren't everyone's cup of tea, but it generated conversation, and people then came out who wouldn't normally enter into the consultation process, but because they were there, they were given feedback and given their views, which has really helped the council there to get a broader understanding of what all of the wider community wants within the town.
Yes.
But it meant that they could move them around to different places as well, which has been ideal.
Yes.
There's been a tendency, I think, to sort of, with permanent public realm schemes, to fall back to tradition and the two-seater bench that maybe looks a bit Victorian and that kind of thing. If you go out there with something that's temporary, that won't be there forever, you can push people, I think, and show what's possible, and then the eventual scheme that follows can probably go further and be more dynamic and exciting and interesting than perhaps what would have happened if you hadn't done the temporary project and tested the water. And that we're going through that kind of process, aren't we, Rob, on quite a few projects, which is really exciting.
That's good to hear. We look forward to seeing more on them.
Yeah.
Okay,
So,
we'd better keep moving. I think I'm just keeping one eye on the time.
Okay, because we've got about 15 minutes, haven't we? So the next one, we have covered a lot of these already, really, but that sort of idea of practical design and delivery considerations, you know, it's all very well drawing a pretty picture, but we need to actually help people make it happen. And some of the things we were sort of talking about is, you know, a lot of these projects, community-based projects, can start really small. It doesn't need to be the grand plan. Clearly, we showed a big scheme, you know, for our design submission. Actually, my third place could be as simple as a decent park bench on a grass verge in a housing estate. But one of the points we wanted to make was actually adding a layer of design and enthusiasm to that feature, however small, is really important, because suddenly it transforms it and makes people, you know, more interested in it. So if you're going to put a picnic bench on a grass verge, make it a brilliant one, I suppose is the message. And a lot of the projects we worked on with community groups, it's about building in that sort of design from day one, so that once it becomes its own thing and they take it over as a life of its own, it's actually got that design basis and that extra quality, which is really important.
If we kind of had local artists involved in things, it grounds it to the place and it reflects the people. I think that would be a really important part of the design work as well. And working with local landscape architects. So for me, if this was to go ahead, I'd be really keen on working on this, because I'd use it myself as well. And you naturally become a stakeholder in that sense, that the people, there's always going to be someone in the area that's got an interest or a skill that they can put into it, which will develop it and make it even more valuable and useful and really meaningful interventions. Like Simon says, if you put a bench in, make sure it's a brilliant bench. And there will be different things. There might be something local that you wouldn't know about coming into a design just from a normal design firm as a consultant. But if you speak to people, there's all sorts of funny stories to things that can link to something. You know, does it become like an arts trail? And there's some really good sites around the corner from our chosen site is Left Bank in Leeds, which is like a big old church that now they have like arts classes, study spaces, a lot of these kind of things. And you can tell though that the people have grown it, know about that space and know about the people that are going to use it. So everything that they've done is always a success, because it's very meaningful and well thought out, and not just been placed by somebody who thinks they know what people want.
I think that's an important point, Beatrice, as well, because it means that there's an invested interest there, and actually people respect it more. So the potential of antisocial behaviour reduces somewhat, because there's a good chance that the kids who are playing there have parents or members of the family or members of the community that they know who actually may have built one of the benches or some of the play furniture. So it's another means of getting that involvement from the community, but also that's ownership and respect of the space.
Abu makes the point about lots of dead ends and concrete on estates that harbour antisocial behaviour, and if they're brought back into use and given a purpose, it'll change how people use them, which I think is exactly what you're saying, you know, and it's ownership as well, isn't it? Definitely.
There's a nervousness, isn't there, about, well, you know, what if we put something there and it gets broken? But I think sometimes you've got to try these things, haven't you? And you know, that's something that we've learned through projects. And I hate to mention the theme of money, but these things cost, and I think that's an important delivery point. And there is thankfully a lot of funding streams out there at the moment, you know, focus on this type of small scale projects. And I think the lessons learned we've had is that there's competition out there. You know, you have to, however small your group is, you have to go in there professionally and show what the big idea is. And it's really important to sort of get that across. But there is money out there and there are funding opportunities.
Grab them quick.
Yes. Another point we were thinking about was how do these spaces evolve, you know, and the sort of, you know, future technology. and also, we are coming out of lockdown. What is, the post-COVID landscape meant to be like? Will we go back to what we were before, or will things have moved on? I like to hope that things would have moved on for the better with these kind of spaces and town centres. I don't know what everyone else thinks on that.
I certainly agree. I think there's less likelihood that everyone will rush back to their offices and commute to big city centre offices. I think there will be more people who may not work from home every day of the week, but they'll certainly work from home maybe 2 or 3, and they'll be looking for their third place to be able to get a break from being in the spare room or sitting at the dining room table while they do their work. So I think it's a very valuable. We need to consider how we can use more of the infrastructure that's already there and use it better so that the community can enjoy it.
I think
Flexibility.
another thing that changed though in lockdown as well, people started talking to their neighbours that they hadn't spoken to for the 5 years that they had lived on their street. There were community groups of people making sure that the people had their Tesco shopping at a point when nobody was even wanting to go to the supermarket. And you kind of hope that after this point, people continue to talk to each other and check in on their neighbours and just say hello, even though people will be less vulnerable, hopefully, once we kind of get the vaccine round. Everyone will still want to kind of integrate more within that 20-minute community and talk and just say hello, like we have done so much more in the last year than we ever probably did before then.
So I suppose in summary on that topic, actually this isn't about creating something that's about COVID. This is actually creating about something that should have been there in the first place, really. I'm conscious of time. We've got less than 10 minutes, so perhaps we jump onto the next theme, and then we've got a bit more time for questions, and we'll race through this one. But perhaps we jump over these because we've touched on that already. We've got a couple of project examples that, if you jump back one slide, I mentioned earlier Sleaford Marketplace. Very long story short, but there's sort of an aspiration on this marketplace to sort of move away from it being a car park. That's something that's been explored and looked at, and personally I think it's a crying shame that so many marketplaces across the country are car parks or used for car parking. So we worked with the council to create a small pop-up project that carved out the space for a cafe spill out. Nothing, no rocket science in this, but what it did was it took 3 or 4 car parking spaces out of it and got people used to that idea, and the businesses loved it. We were able to put in some nice, bright, fun planters, and this thing has grown. And the bottom right-hand corner is nothing to do with us. The left-hand corner is our sort of pop-up project. But off the back of that, that's now what the space looks like on the bottom right-hand corner. And there's aspirations to move that forwards throughout the whole of the space. So then moving on to the next one.
As we were saying, that top left photo beforehand, you can't actually see one person.
No.
There's not a single person in that photo.
It's an alien space, and it should be the heart of the town.
And we found, looking at other market towns as well, that a lot of the car usage isn't through visitors. It's actually local residents who are within 5 or 10 minutes walking distance from those locations. But the fact that the parking's there and it's free, people do it just because it's offered to them. Yeah. So if you can show that there's better potential use for that space, then actually it's changing behaviour, but it's doing it in a small, incremental way that people don't get worried about.
It's all part of this, the movement now, 15-minute city, 20-minute. I mean, we had downhill on last month, and in Sweden they're talking about the 1-minute city. So it's all or next 1-minute neighbourhood. So it's all part of that huge movement at the moment, isn't it?
Yeah, brilliant. So this one, the kind of concept behind this is Holgate allotments in York. There was this railway carriage with a lot of heritage for the railways in York, obviously, that had landed. We don't know how it got there on one of the plots. And the association had the idea of creating a place to meet for a cup of tea. That's all it was. It was just a place. There's obviously lots of issues around loneliness with older people and allotments. And it was the place to just meet for 5 minutes. So we got behind the project, and as I was talking about earlier, when you put forward, I suppose, a professional proposition, we were able to sort of access funding. And I think off the top of my head, we helped gain about 15 grand worth of funding, and we worked with them from sort of day one to deliver it. And what's fantastic is it has sort of created has a life of its own now. And a few people came in one weekend and created that railway image in the bottom right hand corner, you know, as a nod to that railway heritage. And you know, you'd see that in a Chelsea flower show garden, it will get a gold medal. And that was something that a few retired people created in a weekend, you know, because they thought, why not? So moving on.
I think, Simon, just on that point, there was one of the comments there about maintenance and how you maintain these spaces, and you've just touched on that fact there. If you get a group who are also passionate about it, you can often find that people are actually looking for things to do in the outdoor environment, and there are ways and means of getting groups together that will actually look to maintain it. But also, if it is a real community space, and in a third place for a lot of people, they'll respect it more and they'll be more careful when they're in that space to avoid damaging it, which then means that there's less need for maintenance.
Definitely.
Ownership again, isn't it? Yeah, you're right.
It's a big issue, you know. No one's going to pretend maintenance, ongoing management issues, insurance, all these things are difficult, you know, and they're things that I suppose that's what comes back to that idea of the network of my third places, is learning from how other people are tackling these issues, because people have done it all before. And then just to finish, we've already talked about this project, so here's a couple of images from Spark York that Rob and I were involved in from day one and are very proud to have been part of. So I don't know if there's any other questions or things we wanted to touch on, Romy.
Well, I think it's a perfect time to ask. Tanya has asked if you have an idea for a third place locally, how do you recommend rallying support and getting things done, avoiding bureaucratic barriers? There is a lot about bureaucratic barriers. So I don't know, I guess it might be a good idea to have a conversation with you and your team, Simon and Rob, you know, and just gain some insight into how you've achieved it in various places.
Absolutely. I think people learn along the way with these projects and with some of the pop-up work we've done. And as I say, it's not easy, but it's about getting that message out there and actually doing something. And I suppose that starting small approach means that park bench could perhaps happen, you know, without, you know, planning permission, for example, and all these other challenges. And you start making it happen and seeing things develop from there.
I think
Simon, sorry, go on, Beatrice. Sorry.
Sorry, Rob. I think we do this every time. I think a really interesting case studies. Meanwhile Gardens in London, they started in the 70s, and it was just, I think it was a site from old slum housing that had been demolished. And it was obviously going to be built on for housing again in the future, but they didn't have plans together yet. And a few people came together and said, we're going to do a small community garden. But and that's why it was called Meanwhile Gardens, for the meanwhile. But they built it as a temporary scheme, but people came together so much and it grew to such a success. It's never been built on since, and it's evolved as that kind of garden. So if there's some of these sites, if you can kind of get going of the idea of it being temporary, there are sites before that have continued, and now they've continued for another 50 years.
It'd be wonderful, wouldn't it?
Yeah, definitely. I think, as Simon mentioned before as well, if there's a I wouldn't say a professional plan, but if there is a drawn scheme there, it just helps convince people actually that what the potential is for the space, and you can actually add layers to it, so you can show how it's not going to cost the earth to deliver a couple of pop-up interventions, but then almost show how you can add layers over the years as money and funding becomes available to actually build it to this longer term aspiration. So it's not about going to the table and saying, actually, we want to transform this garage block into this office environment where there's all these uses, because that would frighten a lot of people. It's saying, actually, we've got this space, ultimately it could become X, but to get to that point, we want to try all of these other little steps to avoid frightening them and thinking that it is either going to hinder their potential to sell the site in the future, but also to prevent them from thinking that it's going to cost a small fortune to actually implement. These things don't have to cost the earth.
I think so. The big message on that is starting small, isn't it? And don't be paralyzed by, you know, the challenges, because there are challenges and it's difficult.
And look for precedents as well. Look for what's been done elsewhere. You often find that the ideas are great, but they may well have been delivered in other locations. So showing councils and landlords actually that it can be done is half the problem.
That's very true. I'd love this to start a real movement. You can see on this slide the Instagram account My Third Place UK. So do have a look at that. Do join that. We'd better draw today to a close, I'm afraid, but thank you all for some brilliant questions. And I must just mention, Stephen said, this is all great, but we also have a need for a fourth place, which is public toilets, which I think actually we do need to support that. And I think Patricia's particularly interested in those as well. So yeah, let's not forget those. But thank you all. That's been a great conversation. Lovely to see your amazing work again. I'm even more sort of blown away by these ideas now than I was in December. It's been really great to hear your insight and thoughts that went into it as well. Would you be able to just stop sharing, Beatrice, for a moment, and I'll just a couple of final slides up. Hopefully I don't know why, but my PowerPoint hasn't been behaving itself at all today, so I'll see if this now works properly. I don't think, yes, right, we are finally. So hopefully that has brought reduced inequalities, SDG 10 to life a little bit more, and you agree that you know is exactly in line with what we've been talking about. And that's the aim of this series, really, to sort of bring the SDGs to life and give you ideas on how you can act to improve the situation. We also have all the social media, so you know, please do join up, and if you're on our email newsletter list, which you can sign up on our Contact Us page, you will make sure you don't miss any of these in future. And I hope you can join us again in a conversation. This is just an example of our Instagram page, which again, we talk about lots of these same sort of subjects on. So do follow us and make sure you don't miss out. And coming up before too long, in May, we're going to talk about internally for a change, the Plus, our new factory. I hope you haven't forgotten that by joining us each month, you gain entry into a draw for a competition to win a trip to Norway next year when we open. But we thought next month we could give you some updates on where it's at. I think the second wing of the 4 is now built in the forest, so it's all getting very exciting. June, we're going to talk about, don't quite how to sum it up, but outdoor working. We were talking earlier about the move to different ways of working and the need for more open space and outdoor offices, if you like. So we have Oliver Heath and Barry Jenkins joining us in June to talk about what you need to do. And I know a lot of people are looking at different areas to achieve sort of outdoor office environments, including landscape architects. So we hope that'll be interesting, bringing biophilia into the workplace as well. And then in July, we're moving on to a conversation about slightly value engineering, but to how we manage the procurement process in construction, and trying to do our best in that, because we're not very responsible, I think, at the moment, the amount of waste that's produced. So those are the upcoming Fikas every Friday, last one of the month at 11 AM. And we've got our CPDs, as I'm sure many of you are aware of, so you can contact us for those if you'd like to hear more about everything that we're up to at the moment. So thank you again. That was just a very quick overview. We've got a few more points in the chat. I'll just thank yous. Yeah, thank you to everyone. I hope we haven't missed any questions. We will have this on catch up on YouTube and Vimeo very soon. So please do share that. And if you've had to leave, well, if you've had to leave early, you won't be hearing me talk. Anyway, if you did leave early, you can catch up with previous speakers as well. So thanks again, everybody. Yeah, lots of thank yous, fabulous session, and hello and goodbye to everybody out there joining us. We'll head off now. Would you like to say bye, everyone?
Thank you so much.
Okay, and thanks to my colleagues Jack and Matt in the background as well, keeping everything going. Okay, see you all soon, hopefully.
Bye then.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.